Hello, how's it going? Zach D Productions here, and I'm here for an Era review. So for this Era review, I'll be giving basically my thoughts on the John Payne era of the band Arya. Arya, I think, is an incredibly underrated band. I'm not really sure why this band isn't getting a lot of attention now. I get that they're not, as successful as, other bands during their time, and I know that their debut was pretty big, and after that, they just kind of fell off, and I'm not really sure why. They didn't really gain that same amount of success. I mean, their debut was just apparently at their peak, and it just kind of ended there for some reason. And it's kind of sad to see, because I think that there's a lot of other solid stuff in Arya's career. But yeah, this review will be for the John Payne era of Arya, all the albums with John Payne. And, I do like John Payne's voice. You could maybe say he's an underrated vocalist. And you know what? I even have my days where I do prefer John Payne to John Wetton. Now, I know that a lot of people would prefer John Wetton, at least his era of Arya. But I gotta be honest, most of the songs that I do return to from Arya are from the John Payne albums. So yeah, I really do like his voice, and I think one of the reasons being is he has a lot of emotion to his voice. You can maybe say his voice is very unique, and more range to his voice than John Wetton's, I think. Now, don't get me wrong, I think John Wetton has a fine voice, but I don't know. I just think that John Payne delivers much more. Now, in the 80s, they've only released 3 albums, and the first 3 albums were with John Wetton in the band. The debut, Alpha, and then Astra. So, yeah, and I think those are all solid albums. I mean, when it comes to the original 3 albums, I would definitely say that the debut is the best one out of the 3, but I think when John Payne came to the band, I mean, that was a brilliant decision on their part. And I do think that some of the best material from Arya is from the John Payne era. So it all started with this album here, Aqua. This is Arya's 4th album and the first album with John Payne in the band. Definitely one of their best, I'd say. And honestly, my ranking for the band Arya, because I do realize I have done a ranking for this band before, it'd probably be drastically different now, because this album might even be #1 for me nowadays. I don't know. Now, I know some people would say that the debut or Alpha, or maybe even Astra is their best, but, the original John Wetton era. But again, man, I really like the John Payne era a lot. This does have some of their best work, though, of course. Who Will Stop the Rain, great song. You also got Lay Down Your Arms, which is just fun and catchy. Just really fun to listen to. You also have Someday, which I think is kind of an underrated song. I think where it goes musically is very interesting, and just the way the song is structured, really like it a lot. And then you got A Far Cry, another great track. Love Under Fire. I mean, this is definitely maybe one of my favorite Arya songs. I don't know. Really great vocal work from John Payne. You can definitely hear the emotion in his voice. And that is one of the things that I do have to say about not only just this album, but the rest of the John Payne era, is I feel like the John Payne era delivers the more emotional side of Arya, while the John Wetton stuff delivers the more fun and upbeat side of Arya. I guess it depends on what mood you're in. You can choose what era of Arya you want to listen to. So, because a lot of the John Wetton stuff is like, have fun driving on the highway with the sunroof down type music or whatever. That's not really something that you get with the John Payne stuff. It's more like you really want to sit down and observe the music and just listen to it and just feel the emotion in John Payne's voice. But yeah, great album for sure. Really dig this one. I mean, if you like any type of rock music, definitely check this one out. And even if you're not familiar with any of the John Wetton stuff or any of the John Payne stuff. Would this be a good starting point if you're wanting to check out Asia? I'd probably say so. I mean, definitely check out this album. It's really good. Again, I'd say it's one of their best. Definitely has some of their best songs, in my opinion. And then we move on to Arya, which I do think is a step down from Aqua. I definitely think Aqua is a much better album than Arya, but Arya still does have some good songs on it. I mean, Anytime is a great song, great opening track that has some great vocals from John Payne, and Summer is another pretty good song. More on the upbeat side, I really do enjoy this one. Don't Cut the Wire, another good song. Feels Like Love, a bit more emotional, kind of on the atmospheric side of things as well. Really good one. Remembrance Day, it's a decent song. But yeah, one of their darker albums, I'd say. And yeah, I really dig this one. It's not one of their best by any means. But I do like it, though. I still think it's a really good album for what it is. And then we move on to Arena, which I do think is honestly a step up from Arya. I actually enjoy this album a lot. This is another album that I'd maybe say is one of their best. I'm not sure how popular that opinion is, but, you know, I think this album is kind of underrated. I really do like this one. I think most of the songs are great. I mean, the title track, Arena, excellent song that's very intriguing to listen to, and just the song structure and just, you know, the way it sounds and everything, it's just really good. And then you have Heaven, which is probably another one of my favorite Asia songs, to be honest. Definitely a song that I think deserves more attention, especially. Really emotional and, you know, very melodic. Just excellent song. The Day Before the War, one of the more proggy songs of the John Payne era. I always really liked this one. It's got an interesting intro to it. Kind of reminds me of the band Yes a little bit. Yeah, really good song. That is very dark and emotional. Words, I think, is kind of another underrated track from these guys. This song, honestly, might have some of the best vocal work from John Payne on the album. Really good. Then you have Turn It Around, which is very good as well. But yeah, then there's other songs on the album that I just find okay. Like Never Falling and Tell Me Why. These songs, they're alright. I mean, they don't really do much for me, to be honest. Few skippable tracks on the album, but that's not really saying much because even the skippable tracks I don't really think are bad. But they just lack replay value. But still, I think it's a strong album for what it is. I would say that this also has some of their best work. Like I said, especially since you have songs like the title track in Heaven, especially. Great songs. And then we move on to Archiva, the Archiva albums. Now, they did release 2 of these, but I only have the first one, to be honest. And, yeah, I do appreciate that they do release, they did release these. I mean, I can definitely see why they didn't include them on any main albums. Like, when you do listen to these songs, you can definitely see why, but, you know, there's definitely some gems to be found on the Archiva albums. Like Heart of Gold, I don't understand how this song didn't make it on any of the main albums. This song especially. This is probably the one Archiva song that I return to the most, and I think I can speak for many people on that because I think a lot of Asia fans can agree that this is a great song for sure. It's very emotional and it's catchy and it's very heartfelt. Just a great song to listen to. You also got I Believe, which I think is pretty good. But once again, man, I mean, there's tracks on this album and the other Archiva album where you can listen to them and think, yeah, I can definitely understand why they didn't include these songs on any album or anything. But again, some of these songs, I'm like, why didn't they include this on, you know, a previous album, like Heart of Gold, for example, I think is maybe one of the best Asia songs, or at least one of the best ones with John Payne in the band, at least. But yeah, the Archiva albums, they're all right. So then we move on to, well, we move on to Rare, which is just, you know, experimental music, which, I mean, there's not really much to say about it, really. So let's go ahead and move on to Aura. And yeah, this is a good album. I will say that this album did take some time to grow on me. There was a time where I said that this was one of their weakest, but I don't know if I'd really say that these days. I do think it's a good album. Now, would I say it's one of the best with John Payne? Probably not, but I still think it's a strong album for what it is. I mean, this album does have some of their most emotional tracks, I think. Especially Ready to Go Home, which I think is one of their most emotional tracks. I do like that song, though. I think it's really good. You know, I like the melody and just how emotional it is. John Payne is really giving it his all in this song. You also have other great tracks like Wherever You Are and Forgive Me. Forgive Me is a bit more experimental. You could say it's more on the psychedelic side of things. It's a really dark sounding song as far as, you know, the way it sounds and everything. Yeah, I like where it goes musically and everything when you listen to it, and yeah, it's a good song, definitely one of the highlights on here. But yeah, there are some tracks on here that, I'm not gonna lie, they do lack replay value. Once again, not the best of the John Payne stuff, but I wouldn't say it's the worst either. So Aura, it's a pretty good album for what it is. The first half of this album I do think is much stronger than the second half. The second half of this album honestly does lack replay value, but there's some very strong stuff on this album for sure. And then we move on to the final album that they've released with John Payne, which I don't have, along with Rare, which I don't think I'll ever get. But that album is Silent Nation. It's easily the worst Asia album with John Payne, I think. And I think many individuals can agree with me on that. I mean, it does have a few decent tracks, or maybe like one or two decent tracks, but nothing that I could really return to that much. I mean, this is definitely the least interesting album that they've done with John Payne, without a doubt. And, you know, it's kind of sad that this is the album where they decide to, you know, give John Payne his final bow with Asia. You know, because I do think that this is honestly their weakest album. Not just the weakest album in the John Payne era, but I actually think it's Asia's worst album. But, again, it's got one or two good tracks, but that's about it. A lot of this album is just very bland and boring, and it's just so uninteresting, you know? It's really hard to describe my complaints with it. I mean, if you've listened to it, you probably know what I'm talking about. I mean, it's definitely not as good as the other John Payne stuff, but I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, I do think that Aqua probably is the best one with John Payne, and I think many individuals, many Asia fans can agree with me on that. I also think it's one of their best as well. It might even be their best album, in my opinion. Arena probably being my second favorite of the John Payne stuff. Not sure how popular that opinion is. Either Arena or Arya is my second favorite. I don't know. I have days where that does change, but again, some of my favorite Asia songs are from the Arena album. And Aura, I do think is good as well. Not as good as the previous three albums I've mentioned, but still solid though. And of course, Silent Nation is easily the worst of them all, I think. But yeah, so the John Payne era of Asia, pretty good, I'd say. Yeah, it does have some of the weakest material from Asia, again, especially from the Silent Nation album. And there's a few songs on Aura, maybe mainly in the second half of the album, that do lack replay value, but nothing that I would say is unlistenable or just awful or anything, but yeah, so there's a lot of good stuff in the John Payne era. Again, I think some of the Asia songs that I listen to the most are from the John Payne era. Lots of good albums, and of course lots of good songs as well. So if you are someone that likes the band Asia, but you've been pretty dismissive towards the John Payne era, like you're one of those individuals where it's like the John Wetton era is all that matters, definitely give this era another try. I would definitely recommend it, especially the Aqua album, which I think is just a great album. I don't think any of the songs on that album are bad. Now, yeah, there's songs better than others, of course, which is what you get on any album, but yeah, so that's my review of the John Payne era of Asia. Overall, one of the better examples of switching vocalists, you know, having a substitute vocalist, because, you know, there's other bands that have done this that they haven't been able to pull it off that well. You know, for example, like the Ripper Owens era of Judas Priest and the Blaze Bayley era of Iron Maiden, just to name a couple examples. I do think that John Payne's era of Asia is one of the better examples on, you know, how they improved. Now, granted, Asia was still pretty early in their career whenever they decided to pull John Payne into the band. While those other bands I've mentioned, you know, they were pretty far in their career, so. But that is something that I did want to point out, though. So let me know what you guys think. So on that note, thanks for watching and have a good one.